What if the Bible, a book so many turn to for comfort and salvation, also holds stories of torture so graphic they could rival a modern horror film? We all know the Sunday school versions, the heroes, the miracles, the happily ever afters. But hiding in plain sight are accounts of agony so brutal they've been glossed over and mostly forgotten. And these aren't just tales of tough times, they're chronicles of deliberate, soul-crushing torment. Today, we're unearthing 7 of the most blood-curdling tales of torment you were never told in church. From eye gouging to being left for dead, get ready to discover the brutal punishments hidden within the scriptures. This is the side of the Bible you were never meant to see. First up is a story that's even more terrifying because of how little it says. The 11th chapter of Hebrews in the New Testament is often called the Faith Hall of Fame, listing legends like Abraham and Moses. But near the end of the chapter, the mood shifts from triumph to something much, much darker. Hebrews 11:35 mentions believers who faced a horrifying choice. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Let that sink in. These unnamed people were offered a way to stop the pain, but they said no. Why? They believed in a better resurrection. While that verse is vague, just 2 verses later in Hebrews 11:37, the author gives us a horrifying list of what other faithful people endured, including being stoned and even sawn in two. The real horror here isn't just physical, it's psychological. It's the story of people who, in a moment of unbearable pain, chose to keep suffering, believing their agony was buying them a greater reward after death. It reveals a chilling side of faith, where enduring the unimaginable became the ultimate test of devotion. Next, we have the prophet Jeremiah, a man whose divine messages basically put a giant target on his back, leading to some of the most drawn-out torment in the Old Testament. He was constantly persecuted, but 2 instances stand out for their sheer cruelty. First, a temple official named Pashur, furious over Jeremiah's prophecies of doom, had him beaten and locked in stocks. Now, these weren't simple restraints. Ancient stocks were designed to twist the body into painful, unnatural positions, holding the neck, hands, and feet for hours until joints were dislocated and the pain was unbearable. But it got worse. Later, as told in Jeremiah 38, his enemies decided to silence him for good. They talked the king into tossing him into an abandoned cistern. This wasn't a well with water. The Bible says it was a pit of thick mud. As they lowered him down, Jeremiah sank into the suffocating sludge, left to die a slow death from starvation and the cold. Can you imagine the terror? Trapped in the dark, unable to move, slowly sinking into a filthy grave. He was rescued at the last second, but the mental scars of being left to die like that are hard to even think about. Everyone knows Judas as the man who betrayed Jesus. But the details of his death, found in 2 different parts of the Bible, paint a picture of grotesque horror that's often skipped over. The Gospel of Matthew says that Judas, full of remorse, hanged himself. But the Book of Acts gives a much more graphic detail, saying that Judas fell headlong, his body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. So, how do you square the 2 accounts? Many have tried, and one popular interpretation pieces them together into a truly nightmarish sequence. In this reading, Judas hanged himself, but either the rope or the branch snapped. He then plummeted, possibly onto the jagged rocks of the very field he bought with his blood money. The fall was so violent that his body literally burst open. It was anything but a peaceful end. It was chaotic and gruesome, a body destroyed first by guilt, then by gravity. The torment of Judas wasn't just in his soul, it ended in one of the most shocking and visceral deaths in the entire Bible. Our 4th story from the Book of Acts shows you just how brutal life could be for early Christian missionaries. While in the city of Philippi, the apostles Paul and Silas were dragged before the authorities on bogus charges. With no trial, the magistrates just turned them over to a furious mob. They ordered Paul and Silas to be stripped and severely beaten with rods. This was a public flogging, meant to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. With their backs torn open and bleeding, they were paraded in front of a jeering crowd. And the torture didn't end there. Acts 16 tells us that after the beating, they were thrown into the inner prison, the deepest, filthiest part of the jail. To make sure they couldn't move, their feet were fastened into stocks. But these weren't just simple clamps. They were designed to stretch their legs as wide as possible, putting constant, agonizing pressure on their already battered bodies. What's truly stunning is what happened next. At midnight, covered in their own blood and locked in an excruciating position, Paul and Silas started praying and singing hymns. Their response turned an act of torture into an act of worship, a defiant display of faith that rose above their physical agony. Daniel in the lion's den is a classic Sunday school story, but the sanitized version completely cuts out the pure psychological terror of the event. The real horror wasn't just about being eaten, it was about being locked in the dark with starving predators for an entire night. After being tricked by jealous officials, King Darius was forced to throw Daniel into a den of lions. The entrance was sealed with a stone, plunging him into total darkness. Just try to imagine the senses. The overpowering stench of animal and decay. The chilling silence broken only by the low growls of hungry beasts circling in the pitch black. Maybe the glint of their eyes catching a stray sliver of light. For a whole night, Daniel was trapped in this state of high alert. Any sound, any movement could have been his last. This wasn't a quick test of faith, it was an all-night psychological ordeal meant to break a person's mind. While Daniel famously survived, the story's brutality is confirmed by what happened next. The following morning, his accusers, along with their families, were thrown into that same den. The Bible graphically notes that the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Also from the book of Daniel, we get the terrifying ordeal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When these three men refused to bow to King Nebuchadnezzar's golden idol, the king flew into a rage and ordered a punishment of unbelievable cruelty. He commanded his furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than normal. The heat was so intense that the Bible says the soldiers who dragged the men toward the furnace were killed by the flames just by getting close. Now, think about what was supposed to happen to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were tied up and thrown directly into that inferno. The goal was an instant, agonizing death by fire, a horrifying public display. The torture here lies in the absolute overkill. It was meant to be a spectacle of power, a terrifying message to anyone who watched. Defy me, and you will be erased. Of course, the story ends with a miracle. The 3 men are seen walking in the fire completely unharmed, joined by a 4th figure looking like a son of the gods. They walked out without even the smell of smoke on their clothes. But that miracle doesn't erase the blood-curdling intent behind the punishment itself. And now we've arrived at our last and perhaps most brutally calculated act of torture in the Bible. This is the story of Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, from the 2nd book of Kings. After he rebelled against Babylon, his army was crushed, and he was captured and brought before the victorious King Nebuchadnezzar. What happened next was a masterclass in psychological destruction. First, right in front of him, Nebuchadnezzar had Zedekiah's own sons executed. This was an act of pure psychological warfare, designed to extinguish the king's entire legacy and future before his very eyes. Then, immediately after Zedekiah witnessed this horror, Nebuchadnezzar delivered the final blow. He ordered that Zedekiah's eyes be gouged out. The slaughter of his sons was the last thing he would ever see. Blinded and broken, he was chained up and dragged to Babylon to live out the rest of his days in a prison. He spent his life in total darkness, haunted by that one final horrific memory. This wasn't just punishment, it was a layered and chillingly cruel act, fulfilling a prophecy from the book of Ezekiel that Zedekiah would be taken to Babylon but would never actually see the city. From choosing your own torture to being forced to watch your children die, these stories show us a raw and brutal side of the scriptures that often gets ignored. They paint a picture of a world where justice could be horrifying, and faith was tested in the most painful ways imaginable. What does it say about our history that these accounts were so carefully preserved in a holy book? Which of these tales did you find the most disturbing? Are there any other dark Bible stories that you think belong on this list? Let us know down in the comments. And if you enjoy digging into the hidden corners of ancient texts, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another deep dive.